I'm Adam Pasquarella, and welcome to episode 36 of The Power of Bold.
From New York City, it's The Power of Bold, the podcast on risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. Join us as we interview world-class performers, analyze life-changing books, and gather actionable insights to help you achieve your goals. Here's your host, Adam Pasquarella.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on this episode of The Power of Bold. I hope all of you are excited for the holiday season and the new year. This is always a great time of year to not only celebrate the holidays with friends and family, but to look back on the year and set our goals for next year. While this can be somewhat intimidating at first, it is a really exciting thing. It is so easy to ignore introspection and reflection in our day-to-day lives, so any excuse to do it is especially welcome. Now, while the reflection process is somewhat unique for everyone, I find it extremely helpful to go back and think about some of the things that I've learned in the current year, and then develop a plan to use and leverage those lessons in the coming year. With this podcast, I've been blessed to speak with some world-class experts on a wide range of topics related to risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. And because this podcast is still young and growing, you may not have had an opportunity to listen to some of these experts share their stories and well-thought, actionable insights. So considering all of this, I wanted to go back and share some of my guests' advice from this year of the podcast. I've decided to split this episode into two. The first half of the episode is focused on my guests' thoughts and advice related to our mindset. Essentially, this is all about the mental game when thinking about your personal and professional goals. This is a topic that always fascinates me, and I was able to speak with some A-list individuals to learn more about how we can avoid common traps and get in the best mental state to achieve our goals. The second part of the episode is related to our skill set. Here, I wanted to share some of the tangible skills that we discussed in certain episodes this year, ranging from decision-making to time management. My guests in these episodes provided some great thoughts on how to improve these important skills in our lives, whether we are novices or experts. You're going to hear some relevant excerpts from these conversations, so if you would like to hear the full discussion, I'd recommend you download the full episode. Between excerpts, you are going to hear the whoosh sound, so get ready for that as well. That's the plan for this episode, and I'm really excited to share it with you. So without further ado, let's get started. Like I said, we are going to spend the first half of the episode reviewing my guest thoughts on mindset. And when I was planning this episode, one guest immediately came to mind. His name is Greg Harden. My interview with Greg was one of my favorite episodes of the year, not only because of the advice and stories that he offered, but because he is a legend at the University of Michigan, my alma mater. He is the Executive Associate Athletic Director at Michigan and has coached Michigan legends like Tom Brady, Desmond Howard, and Jalen Rose. Greg has so many profound thoughts on life, our careers, and accomplishing our goals. If I had to pick one episode for you to listen to in its entirety, it would be this one. That said, I wanted to highlight a few important points from Greg, starting with his thoughts on the number one thing that prevents athletes and other individuals from being the best they can be. Through your work with companies, like you were saying, Dow Chemical, other companies in Michigan, and your work with student athletes at Michigan, what is the number one or the most prominent obstacle that prevents individuals from getting to be the best that they can be?
You say number one?
Yeah.
Are you going to insist on it being number one? All right. Going to insist on it being number one is going to be negative self-talk. How I talk to myself, how I communicate internally. If the enemy within is the enemy. So we're not just talking about mental health where somebody has a biochemical imbalance and their depression is not just because of their attitude or how they were raised. And that happens, but oftentimes we're talking about a person who is not mentally ill. We're talking about a person that wants to be the best at what they're doing. So the mental game, when we start talking about it, is how do you talk to yourself? How do you respond when you make a mistake? How do you respond when you're anxious and when you're fearful? We try to teach people that anxiety and fear is normal. Mm-hmm. Adam, think about some of the most fun you've ever had in your life. Think about a moment where you were daring and you tried something and it turned out to be a magical moment. You were about to crap your pants before you did.
Exactly.
Some of the most fun I've had and everyone listening has had in their life. They were about to I don't know if I should do this. Let's do it. And after they did it and it worked, they said, let's do it again. Anxiety must be turned into excitement. And fear must be turned into passion. How we talk to ourselves, how we process, how we begin to become brutally honest with ourselves. Those are the keys, brother. When we start talking about the number one thing is how do I talk to myself? Am I honest with myself? Can I see myself clearer than everyone else? The ultimate goal, Adam, is to teach people to become the world's greatest expert on one subject. What do you think that is?
It's got to be you.
Come on. If you become the world's greatest expert on yourself, that means you know your strengths and your weaknesses better than anyone else. Do you understand? The breakthrough that comes when you are no longer afraid to look at your weaknesses and analyze them, when you're no longer that guy who's is so humble or so insecure that no one can tell you about your strengths and you can't see your strengths, but you can only see your weaknesses. What we're discovering is that people, even high performance individuals, keep turning out to be human beings, struggling with the same crap everyone else is struggling with.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about a corporate executive or whether we're talking about a Olympian or whether we're talking about that walk-on that everybody believes in because they're playing the game out of love, and there's no confusion about it. But you know that they're struggling mentally to make it to the next level.
Yeah, and I guess one of the best examples of a client that you worked with was Tom Brady. And even when he came on to Michigan's campus, for people that don't know, he was competing for a quarterback spot with a highly recruited competitor, Drew Henson. And so at that point, when he comes into your office, he says to you, I should be starting. What do I do? What did you tell him at that point?
Well, and by the way, even if the people are listening, maybe there'll be a handful of people who don't know who Tom Brady is. But he's identified as being one of the best that ever played the game. Some call him the GOAT. When he walks into my office, now understand, he self-selects to come in. He's not sent. He's not mandated. He says, I've watched what you've done. I like what you and Desmond have done, and I just want to be a starter at Michigan. Adam, the first thing I've got to tell him is bro, I can't help you be a starter. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to create a fantasy that I can get you a starting position. I'm not going to talk to the coaches. I can't teach you how to pass. I can't teach you anything except to believe, if no one else believes in your ass, that you're capable, you're qualified, and you're the best. If nothing else I can give you an attitude that says, if they never play me, I know who I am and what I'm about. And Brady looks at me and say, I'll start there.
And then at that point, he's competing for the job and he ultimately gets it. And he has a good career at Michigan, and I guess my question for you is, what does he do, even at Michigan and obviously now, what does he do that other people don't do?
That's a great question, Adam. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
Brady, you talk about coachable. You understand, while he's the guy you have to put out of the building to stop looking at film. The average person, how long do I have to be here? Okay, I'm going to, coach, I'll look at one more. Brady is that guy you say, son, you need a break. Brady is that guy that's studying defenses So he's like the offensive coordinator. And he's that guy that is going to be, who is so hungry and believes that the most fascinating thing about him to me is how he can have a chip on his shoulder and operate as though he's never started and that he wants the job. This guy, at every stage of his development that you've seen, that everyone else has seen, he's operating as though somebody's trying to take my job. That attitude keeps him on fire. This guy 40 years old.
Yeah.
On fire.
Do you think that attitude kind of developed with him when he was at Michigan and even beyond? Or was he kind of born with that chip on his shoulder?
Say, man, let me make life real simple for you. Tom Brady was the runt of the family. His sisters were like demigoddesses in California in terms of athletics, especially softball. You understand? And he was Brady's little brother.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so all his life he had to prove something. And he came in with that mindset. He also came in with a mindset of respecting authority. His mama and daddy raised him to be a young man that will walk in and say, tell me what you need me to do, and it will be done.
Mm-hmm.
So he came in with so anybody running around taking credit for what Tom Brady became is exaggerating to make a point. Tom Brady came in with some stuff that the average person doesn't have, but the average person can have what he came in with. Dogged determination, a commitment to be coachable, trainable, willingness to learn, a willingness to push himself when the average person doesn't want to do anything. This guy gives 100% of the time.
And you would give similar advice to, say, like a white-collar worker, a 20 or 30-something that wants to get promoted at their job or wants a job with more responsibility. You would just say...
Yeah. I mean, let's be real clear. We're talking about giving people an opportunity to learn what does it take to be the best. Now, if my quest is to be promoted, I just can't hope and just be diligent. I've got to learn things that the average person in my position is not trying to learn. I've got to volunteer to do stuff I don't know how to do. I've got to be that guy that is willing to push himself in the areas that are most uncomfortable. So I'm going to teach that future CEO. To be a future CEO, you first have to commit to self-mastery, mastering your emotions, mastering your fears, mastering your insecurities, being so confident about who you are becoming that you're comfortable with the fact that you're flawed. Hello.
Mm-hmm.
We are all flawed. Nobody is going to be perfect. But the pursuit of perfection can be more fun than bubblegum.
Going back to what you were saying, he's just not satisfied. He wants to keep mastering himself and his athletic skills. It seems to go to your idea of controlling the controllables. I think that's a phrase that you've told many Michigan athletes.
Yes.
Can you maybe speak about that to our audience, just explaining on a basic level what it means and how you've seen it in practice?
And I swear it was born out of my work in alcohol and other drugs. Are you ready for this? One of the greatest quotes I've ever heard in life is called the Serenity Prayer. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have heard this, and a lot of people have no clue that it's been popularized in, I think, AA and all that. But God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to that carefully. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, this is the stuff. And I say, how else can you talk about it? So through all my work, it keeps going back to I have to learn to control what I can't control. And one thing I can control is me. I can barely do that. But when it compared to all the other things I'm fantasizing I need control over, I can't control them. But the one shot I've got, Adam, is self-discipline, self-motivation, self-respect, right? Self-definition. I can control at least how I respond. So to control the controllables, it starts by first understanding, taking the responsibility of who's running your life, who's running your emotions. So I just love the whole concept of teaching people that the one thing that they need to learn how to count on is themselves.
Right, and having the discipline to carry out the changes that you need to make, not only recognizing them. And
self-motivation. If we start talking about, okay, here's the secret. Don't tell anybody I told you, all right?
Got it.
Now, imagine you're sitting in a room with a 300-pound heavyweight wrestler who's from such and such Iowa, and he's just struggling to just improve. And you've been meeting with him for several months now, and you've built a relationship where you can just be straight with him. And so at a certain point, you have to tell anybody, whether they are 16-year-old cross-country whiz kid young lady who's in the medical school and got in school 2 years early because she's so smart, or whether you're talking about a 300-pound lineman wrestler, whether you're talking about the 100-pound gymnast. At a certain point, Adam, you got to tell anybody that will listen. The secret is self-love and self-acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Fight for it, believe in it, trust it. If you cannot love yourself, don't matter what I tell you. I can know how good you are. I can know how your potential. It doesn't mean anything if you don't believe it. And so one of the biggest flaws we have in society is people are always looking for love in all the wrong places. Self-love and self-acceptance. I'm not talking about the narcissistic, ego-driven nonsense that's reinforced constantly by media. I'm talking about being comfortable in the skin you're in. I'm talking about loving yourself, flaws and all. I'm talking about accepting yourself, flaws and all. I'm talking about being somebody that, whether I become an amazing athlete or not, my self-worth and self-esteem is not based on my performance. How I feel about me is not based on football, basketball, gymnastics, my job title, how much money I'm making. We all know rich, powerful people that nobody can stand their asses.
Yeah.
Kids don't even love them. So why not? Because their notion of love is connected to, you've heard in the Judeo-Christian piece that money is the root of all evil. You've heard that before?
I have.
That's not exactly what it says. What it really says is the love of money.
Exactly.
Is the root of all evil. So when we love things other than what it really means to be given the gift of life, we're going to have some problems, son. This is a gift, a blessing, an unbelievable opportunity to become and reach your full potential. But you will not reach it unless you decide to let go of yesterday's baggage, to commit yourself to becoming someone whose behavior is consistent with their beliefs. I'm sorry, I got on a tangent.
That's okay.
Man, can you imagine? I get to do this for a living every day. This is what I get to talk about, reinforce. And I've got to believe it or no one else will believe it.
Next, I want to bring up some excerpts from my discussion with Jeff Haden. Jeff became Inc.com's most read columnist and published a book this year called The Motivation Myth. I found it to be an excellent book on why we sometimes struggle to get started working on our goals and how we can take certain steps to turn our career dreams into realities. For this clip, we're going to start with Jeff explaining what the motivation myth is. And for those listeners who haven't read the book yet, can you just describe from a high level what the motivation myth is?
The premise came from a couple different places, but I'll use one example. I was talking to Venus Williams because if you're going to drop a name, hey, Venus is a good name to drop.
Right.
And she's an interesting person because most people know her for the tennis stuff. And, she's in her late 30s and she's still playing at an incredibly high level, which is pretty much an outlier in the tennis world, period, especially women's tennis. And so you factor that in. But then she also on the side, not even on the side, she has a fitness wear company and she doesn't just license her name and somebody else does it. It's actually her business and she does the design and she runs the business. She has an interior design company where she does stuff for hotels and fitness clubs and larger facilities. She's doing design work. She's running that company. So she's got these 3 different things, and she's going to grad school now. She's got these things that she's doing all these things at a very high level. And I said, was that something when you were little that you just, had this moment where you said, I want to be a Wimbledon champion and I want to be this and I want to be this and I want to be this. And she said, no, I've never been like that. It's always just been, I'm interested in this. I would like to get better at it. And so I thought about that. And I had the same conversation with Kirk Hammett, the Metallica guitarist, another fun name to drop if you like names. And he was the same way. He just wanted to get better at guitar. He didn't have this end goal of 40 years later, them still being able to sell out stadiums and stuff. He just wanted to be a better guitar player. And that carried him along. And so I contrasted that with all the people that I talk to who say, wow, I feel stuck. I'm waiting for my passion. I'm waiting to find my passion. I'm waiting for the motivation to hit me that will carry me forward so that I can set out on this path to achieve this really hard thing. And the big difference is that the people that I know that are incredibly successful at some pursuit, and I'm lucky enough that I know a bunch of them now, none of them describe that lightning bolt moment that all of the people who say they're stuck say that they're waiting for. They just started something they were interested in and let the daily, I put in some effort, I made a little bit of improvement. That feels good. That motivates me to keep going. They just created that little flywheel of effort, success, improvement, fulfillment leads to more motivation. They just let them carry that along. And it's an endless source, as opposed to the people who think I've got to have this giant bolt of motivation that will carry me through forever and ever and ever. But that never hits anybody. And I don't know anyone that is hit. And so that's the major premise of it, is that you don't have to wait for something. You don't have to find your passion first. You don't have to wait for this inspiration to hit you. You can pick something that you're interested in, set a big goal if you want to, but really just focus on, I'm interested in this. Let me explore it and let me work actively at trying to get better at it. And let's see where it takes me, and let the motivation you get from effort and success be what drives you forward for as long as you need to go.
And I obviously follow that pattern. I think it's your formula is success leads to motivation, which leads to more motivation, more success, and that leads to becoming. That's what you say in your book. And so
the people get it backwards. They think motivation comes first, that leads you to success, and I think effort leads to success, which leads to motivation. And so all you really have to do is pick something and say, okay, I'm going to put in a little bit of effort, focused effort, and I'm going to achieve a little bit of success, however small. And that's going to motivate me to say, you know what, that's really cool. If you think of anything that you've done when you were a beginner, like you said tennis earlier, when you first started playing tennis, you probably feel awkward how you feel incredibly awkward. And you think, okay, this is impossible. But then you gain just this teeny bit of skill. And that feels really good. And you think, okay, that's kind of cool. That was a neat forehand. I put that in the corner, or I'm getting more topspin on the ball. That's really fun. And that drives you then to keep going, as opposed to, somehow you have to just wake up one morning thinking, okay, I'm going to be the US Open champion in, 2022. And that's enough to carry you all the way through. It just doesn't work that way.
And that's exactly how you rode that flywheel to become Inc.'s most read columnist, right?
Yeah, I started at the bottom. I had no audience, no nothing, no whatever, but I just thought, okay, well, where do I start and how do I build on that? And as I got a little more success, it all worked out. And that's really how I've done pretty much for the last, say, 15 years. That's really how I've done everything that I've done. It's been that same model of, I'm interested in this. Let's create a process that, if I put the work in, guarantees that I will see some success. And that's a really important key. You have to have a process that will guarantee that you have those little bits of success that will give you the motivation. Because if your process doesn't create success, I mean, if for no other example, think about people that try to lose weight. You go a week, and if you haven't lost any weight on this diet that you've adopted, well, you're going to give up, right? Because there's no success. But if you have a diet and you follow it, that is guaranteed to allow you to lose some amount of weight, then at least you can get to the other end of it and say, okay, this is working. That feels good. And that motivates you to keep going.
Yeah, that's an excellent segue. Well, I didn't mean to ask you about this distinction between goal setting and processes. And it's almost like you have this goal, you set it, and then you almost forget about it, right? Like almost all of your attention is focused on the process.
We're told to, that you've got to have laser-like vision on your goal, and you've got to constantly be thinking about this end goal. The problem with that, if it's a really big one, is the distance between here and there. So if we're running that marathon and I don't run at all, and it's, 6 months from now, I'm supposed to run that marathon, but I go running today and I can barely do a mile, and I come back and I sit onto the couch. And if I'm thinking about that 26 miles I have to run, and I'm picturing what I feel like right now, that gap is insurmountable, right? And it seems too far, and I'm going to quit. And so the goal, run a marathon, really the point of that is to inform the process that you create that will allow you to get there. So, and then you just focus on, what do I need to do today? What am I doing tomorrow? You focus on doing the work. And so if we use my marathon example again, if my goal is a marathon and I create a process and I'm starting from scratch, so my process today is that I'm going to go jog a mile. If that's my process, if I go jog that mile, I can sink onto the couch and feel really tired and creaky and all that stuff. But I can also feel good because I did what I set out to do today. I followed my process. I can check it off. I did that. I don't have to worry about the 26. I just have to worry about today. And so tomorrow, if my process is to run another mile, check it off. Feel good. I did what I set out to do. That'll motivate you to go tomorrow. And then over time, you build through your process. And so at some point, you can pop your head up and look across and say, wow, I know I have to run 26 someday, but I just did a 15.
Yeah.
I'm getting there. That's really cool. And then as soon as you do that, though, put your head back down, look at your list and say, okay, what is it I'm doing tomorrow? Okay, that's what I'm focused on. Mm-hmm. If you do that, you will someday pick your head up and look and say, I'm ready to do whatever it is I set out to do. And you won't have had all those angst-filled moments of, oh my gosh, 3 miles today was so hard. How am I going to do 26? That thought is demotivating. But if you go, wow, 3 miles was hard today, but I did it. And that's what I was supposed to do. And that feels pretty awesome. And that will carry you through to tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things we should think about when designing our own processes? I know a little bit earlier we talked about modeling ourselves off of professionals, for instance. But how do you actually go about doing that? So for your marathon example, like why shouldn't I choose 2 miles on the first day instead of 1? Like what are some things to think about?
Well, I think that's a really good question. Again, my inclination is to go harder than you would than your oh, wow, that sounded terrible. Let me start again.
Sure.
My recommendation would be to go harder than you normally would early on, because if you ease your way into it, well, let's use this for an example. We'll use I decided to ride. Wow, this is the worst little segment you'll ever have on your show ever. I decided at one point when I talked about cycling, I decided I wanted to ride this Gran Fondo. It was 102 miles and 11,000 feet of climbing, and it's a disaster of an event. And so I talked to a local mountain bike professional who he's won national championships and he almost made the Olympic team one year. And it's his Gran Fondo that he set up. And I said, dude, I want to ride your Gran Fondo. And this was 4 months from when I was starting. What do I need to do? He said, well, first of all, you need to quit because you're never going to get there. So no, let's pretend that. And so the first day on the program he set up for me, I had to go out and ride 3 hours, which was 2 hours and 45 minutes longer than I had ridden in like a year. It was awful. But what was cool about it is the fact that I didn't ease into it and that I just said, this is going to be really hard. So let's just start with hard and make that what I'm used to. That paid off in a really big way because by the end of it, I never thought I could do the 3 hours, but I got the 3 hours done. I thought, that was really hard, but I did that. And it set me up with this idea of I can do more than I think I can do. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that you go into something saying, if you've got in your mind what is 100% effort and you say, but I'm just starting out, so I think I'm going to start with around 40 or 50. Well, then you're automatically setting yourself up to underperform and underachieve because you're selling yourself short. So if it's, I don't know, whatever, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but whatever it is you're trying to do, let's say you're starting a business and one of the things you're going to have to do is cold call a bunch of potential customers. If you decide to yourself, I'll do 5 a day for the first week, if that's kind of your inclination, do 10. Yeah. Double it right away. Make it harder because the power of numbers and of putting in that effort makes it much more likely that you're going to see some early successes, and that will be what drives you forward. And if it's a physical pursuit, the difference between running 1 mile and 2 miles is, of course, time and effort. But you're probably going to be just as sore tomorrow from the 1 as you would be from the 2. And so it's really not going to make a difference there, but you will have worked harder and you will have started to ratchet up your expectations for what it is you can achieve. I think we all limit ourselves in our abilities. There's that one Navy SEAL, I forget his name, who says that when people think they're at their absolute limit, they've only done about 40% of what they're capable of. Yeah. And I think that's true. And so when you go beyond what you thought was your limit, it automatically ratchets up for the next time what you think your limit is. And I don't know, that's obviously there is an endpoint to that, but I do think that works a lot of times. There's sometimes, I don't know, I remember back in manufacturing days, I worked in an area where we did 8-hour shifts, and sometimes we'd have to go to 12 hours because we were busy, and you would do a week or two of 12-hour shifts. And then when you went back to 8s, they seemed really short, mm-hmm. Yeah. Even though they seemed really long before. And so sometimes just pushing past will ratchet up your expectations of what you could do and actually make what was hard seem easy. And that's a pretty awesome place to be too.
Next up is Brandon Webb. Jeff Haden spent the last part of that clip referencing Navy SEALs. I've always been intrigued by Navy SEALs and the way that they approach their jobs and lives. In fact, one of the first episodes of this podcast was reviewing one of my favorite documentaries on Navy SEAL training. Because of all of this, I was super pumped to speak with Brandon Webb, a former Navy SEAL and author of Mastering Fear. In the entire discussion, we speak about Brandon's life and his relationship with fear throughout his career. But in these excerpted clips, Brandon shares his story helping one of his best friends overcome a deathly fear and how we can approach fear in our own lives.
What inspired the book was I became really good friends with Kamal Ravikant. He's one of my best friends. Kamal is an amazing guy. He's a technology venture capitalist, best-selling author. His brother founded AngelList, and Kamal is like a crypto guy. Like he's heavily into the crypto space, and him and I got to be really good friends. And I learned that he didn't know how to swim because he had this huge fear of the water. And we would have conversations about it, and he would say, "Yeah, it's really bothering me. I want to do something about it." And I said, "Well, look, let me let me teach you for a week. If you give me a week, I'll teach you how to swim. And he's like, I've had a lot of people try, Olympic swimmers. And I say, well, what do you have to lose? Like, I'll give you my time, 1 hour a morning, Monday through Friday. And so he agreed, and we went to the New York Athletic Club where I'm a member, and I got a lane cleared out, and I said, okay. And I had kind of designed a mini curriculum for him that took these baby steps on getting comfortable with the water, which I knew that was a big issue. I couldn't teach him how to swim. I had to get him semi-comfortable with the water itself. Right. And a lot of people that are really had never swam as a child, they have a big fear of putting their face in the water, like putting it in the water. And so that's what I did. I did drills with him for 15 minutes, face in the water, face out of the water, face in the water, like breathe out when your face is out, exhale underwater, over and over again. And this was like, Kamal was terrified. Like, I remember he would climb in the pool with the ladder backwards, like barely let go and just grasp for the wall as quickly as he can. Yeah. It's like, I was a lifeguard and a rescue swimmer and a rescue diver. He's the kind of people that they teach you about. Like, you've got to learn how to get out of their grip because they grab onto you when they're panicked. Right. So that was Monday. Friday comes. He does a cannonball into the deep end, sinks himself down to the bottom, holds his breath for half a minute, and pushes up to the top. And, and we do some drills. Now it's more like swimming down back and forth. Yeah. And I taught him to replace the wall with rolling on his back and just getting comfortable. Like, that would be his new safe place that he would go to. And we took the subway back to Flatiron where we both live. And he's like, dude, you changed my life. Like, this is crazy. Like, you did something nobody else was able to do. You showed me how to kind of build confidence, over time. And I never thought I would be here, and you got to write a book about this. So that was the inspiration behind Mastering Fear. Yeah.
So for him, you said that he had been trying to do this for a while. He had teachers. So in addition to, teaching him how to float or emphasizing that part, was there also just the mental shift of maybe embracing fear and not trying to avoid it, but trying to leverage it in a certain way? And if so, can you talk about how you did that?
Yeah, I think the thing and to be honest with you, there are a lot of great things that translate experiences and lessons learned in the SEAL community that translate to business and real life. And there are a lot of bad things. Like, you can't beat somebody up because you disagree with them. That happens in the SEAL team. Like, right. I've seen guys take it out back. So the thing, I was fortunate enough when I got back from Afghanistan, I got into training in 2002 and got asked to be a part of a group of instructors that modernized this Navy SEAL sniper course. And we're in a really unique position with budget enough to kind of get the best coaches in the world to come consult and say, how do we teach better? How do we get to such a high level of performance? And it's the one thing I do like about the special ops community in general. They're really early adopters and always looking for an edge. So, we went outside to the community, to professional sports, Olympic champions, and I ended up meeting a friend, a consultant we use, Lanny Basham, who's a close friend of mine today. Lanny, and I believe I talk about him in the book extensively.
Yeah, you do. He's an awesome person.
Yeah, Lanny's amazing. And so he taught us this system of mental management and positive psychology, visualization, how to get rid of the negative self-talk that we all deal with. And so I use that all on Kamal. Like, I seen the results of that in our sniper school, where typically when I was in charge, we were losing 30% of the candidates. When we started changing the way we taught to more positive teaching style, and really emphasizing the positive psychology and mental management aspect, we started graduating everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I started using it on my kids even, and I saw the effects. I was coaching sports, Little League, and saw the same thing. And so it was something I'm just grateful for experiencing during that last few years I was in the SEAL teams. But for sure, I used it on Kamal. I told him to go home and visualize every night. That was part of his homework. And I said, you need to start thinking of yourself as a swimmer now. Like you've had this narrative in your head that you're not good enough, you can't swim. Like you got to change that, and you got to start talking to yourself differently. And I think that played a big impact. And the thing was, I didn't just start teaching him stroke. I knew I had to take small steps to build a little bit of confidence and then take another step, build up a little more, take another step. And I think in how that works for fear is, I talk about it in the book, is if it's a big fear or small fear, you put it into the system, and sometimes, you've got to give it some practice. Some people can just go, you know what, I've got this fear and I'm going to go do it. But other people, even you and I talked about before the show, like big things like career transition, it's scary stuff. I was there myself. I lost my first business. I got divorced. I owed people money, and I had to take a job. I got this amazing job with L3 Communications, making more money than I ever made in my life. And then I remember a few of my friends thought I was crazy for leaving. They're like, how can you leave this? Like, you just, you lost everything. Now you got this amazing, job where you're making, probably close to top 1%, 3% income. And I was like, look, I'm just not happy. Mm-hmm. I would rather, be a dive master in the Bahamas than do this job. So I just said, I've got to leave. And I also thought, you know what, I've done a good enough job here. And you're probably in a similar situation where in reality, even if you left a year later, you could probably come back and get a job in law.
Sure.
But we're so gripped by these fears sometimes, and you just go, oh, well, maybe I won't.
And so just to wrap up here, I always ask, my guests one thing that listeners can do to put their ideas into practice. And so I'll ask the same of you. If a listener has a really deep, overarching fear of something, whatever it is, what can they start doing at the end of this episode to help them master their fear?
I would say, it's hard to answer this with one thing, but the thing I talk about, the reason I get into knowing what matters is I think that's so important these days, because I see a lot of people drifting through life without really understanding like what truly matters to them. And for example, I have a lot of, now that I'm an entrepreneur and built a business, people follow me on Instagram and say, oh, how do I be rich? I'm like, what is rich to you? Have you even thought about the number? And most people don't have any idea on what that number is. And because like time is finite, you can only spend so much money. And I did an exercise in business school where we figured it out what it was. It's about $400,000 a year. Like we all did the exercise, like what's your perfect year? And we all got to within a few $1,000s of each other. And then when you go, okay, that's the best life. That's like the ultimate dream life, and I'm not talking about mega yachts or anything within reason, right? But sure. Vacations, housekeeper, whatever. It's about $400,000. And then you back into the math and go, okay, well, how much do I have to have in the bank or invested to produce that kind of passive income? And it's roughly about $10 million. And so there you go. Like that's, but most people don't think about it. They just think I want to be rich, and they don't think about, really what that means to them. So that's why I get into what matters, because that could be, people say, I want this life or I want that life, but really focusing on what you want, and then figure out what's in the way. And usually if it's a fear, I think visualizing and changing it. If I could pick one thing, it would be self-talk. Mm-hmm. Changing the way that you talk to yourself right now. Like we all have the voices creep in. I have a mantra. I have a mantra I read every morning. And sometimes when I'm off center, because I'm human like everybody else. This summer we had my companies, we spend several $100,000 on social media ads, and we got shut down. Facebook is a big channel for us, and we got shut down. Our whole ad set, we lost probably $450,000 in revenue in a couple weeks. Talk about terrifying.
Yeah.
I went back. I was freaking out, and I went back to my mantra. I'm like, okay, things are going to be okay. Like we'll get through this. But I think the self-talk would be probably one of the most things I would recommend absolutely is changing that conversation in your head. And I think that whatever you call it, mantra, writing down the kind of person you want to be and the positive kind of affirmation stuff. And when you hear that negative self-talk creep into your head, pull it up on your smartphone and read it to yourself. And it really start reprogramming the way that you talk and think about yourself is a huge part.
Finally, the last excerpt I wanted to share in the mindset portion of this episode is from my conversation with Daron Roberts. This was a really fun interview because both Daron and I are lawyers, yet he took a career risk that few, if any, law school graduates actually take. Upon graduating from Harvard Law School, he decided to pursue his dream of becoming an NFL coach. You'll have to listen to the entire episode to hear how things turned out. But here is Daron Roberts speaking about his decision to pursue football and some skills that he used when navigating his first job for the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, and that's so fascinating, and it's in the beginning of the book where you speak about your thoughts at that time, and for those again of people that don't know much about law school, there's sort of this subtle pressure to go into these big law jobs, these jobs at big commercial firms. Not only are they prestigious, but they pay well, and they really set yourself up for the future. And a lot of people take those opportunities. And so the fact that you decided to go a totally different route is fascinating. And it's something that I'd like to hear more about. Just what your thinking was at the time. What was your your risk tolerance for doing something non-traditional? What were you thinking at the time?
Yeah, so Adam, I think you're being nice. Listeners out there, I'm of the belief that there's definitely some collusion between the law schools and law firms. So the law schools can set the tuition at an exorbitant rate, and the law firms understand that they can overpay first and second year associates because you have to work. So they get you for indentured servitude. So yeah, it's for me, I'll be honest with you. I worked at 3 firms. I never walked away thinking to myself, wow, I really want to be like that partner. Not in a negative way, not in the sense of like they were mean people, but I didn't feel like there wasn't an aspirational tug in the law for me at the time. And that sort of bothered me. I was willing to dismiss it, to be honest with you. And I wasn't really searching for alternatives before I went and worked a camp in South Carolina with a buddy of mine, and then just decided I want to be a football coach. And my risk tolerance is pretty high. My dad is a Baptist minister. Always talks about the fact that you're going to die soon, so you better get right with Jesus. So I'm very much, I think, a believer in time being finite, and you need to bring your long-term goals into the present tense, because it's not a given that you're going to make it to whatever age you think you want to achieve some of those things. So I was excited. People around me weren't excited. My girlfriend wasn't excited at the time. Obviously, we broke up. My parents were supportive. They were surprised, but supportive. My classmates were bewildered, I guess maybe is the term. I had some really good law school professors who gave me great advice and were really supportive. So
that's great, because a lot of the time it seems like people struggle to take action the way you did because of the expectations of others, especially, family, friends, classmates. things like that. But you, like you said, you were getting positive vibes from a lot of your friends and family, which makes it easier. And so at that point,
You know what? Hold on. I'm sorry, Adam. And there's one point I want to make on this.
Sure.
I think that what you said is very true, and I think that, for listeners, there will be points when you float crazy ideas by people in your circle, and sometimes their response will be based on their experience and not necessarily the forecast for you. So they may not say it, but they may say, "Oh, that's crazy. It will never work," because the last time they tried something that was similar, it didn't work for them. Right. So just be very careful about who you listen to. I've had experts at all phases of my life try to tell me how to operate in a situation they've never been in. I didn't have any lawyers in my family, but everyone knew what kind of law I should practice.
Right.
Right. So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And I just think I think that I emphasize is just be careful of the feedback, and sometimes you just have to try to eliminate the noise.
Yeah. Do you have any further tips on that? Obviously, you want to get some advice from people that clearly have your best interest at heart, but like you were saying, they may not know exactly. Either they're using their own life as their framework, or they don't really know what they're talking about. So how do you navigate both of those?
Yeah, I think you should listen to the advice that relates to tactics and not necessarily forecast. So some people are very general. It won't happen. That's crazy. There's no way. Someone's already thought about it. It'll definitely fail. Like, those are more forecast driven, which now you're just pulling out a crystal ball. But I would be very attuned to the advice that deals with, well, hey, this part of your proposal is flawed, and that's why I think they won't accept it. Now, that may be good feedback that you can go back and tweak the plan, right? But those blanket sort of forecasts, it's a guessing game. And so now you're choosing whether or not to give a vote of confidence to someone's ability to guess the future. Listen for the tactics and the feedback on what parts of the plan they think may not work. There may be some good data that you can use to maybe even improve your approach. So look for tactics and not necessarily forecast.
For sure. And along with that, you have to navigate the organization as well. And you were very deliberate in the way that you sought to ingrain yourself within the chief so that there was less of a chance that the team would, let you go after your time there. Can you maybe, so say like a listener just got their foot into the door for their dream organization and wants to stay and make a great impression. What can they learn from your experience with the Chiefs when they're going about doing that?
So I do think you can't exaggerate humility. So regardless of your background, awards, whatever it is, especially for people who are trying to break into a new market where there may be some skepticism about your worthiness of being there, you have to start and end with humility. I also think if you're making a drastic pivot, so you're going from law to you want to become a chef, you're going to have to be a barback, or you're going to have to be the guy or the gal that's just sweeping up floors. Embrace that as much as possible and see that time as an opportunity for you to really observe what's happening at every level of the organization, because that's invaluable content that will help to guide you when you do have to make decisions. And then finally, I would just say you're going to have to go sometimes, eliminate the noise, go off of social media, take some cell phone breaks, like get all in, like really be invested so that they're getting your best and you are getting the most out of the experience.
Mm-hmm. Just going all in essentially and ensuring that you're going to make it work no matter what. And you clearly did with the Chiefs. Like I said, you slept at the stadium at some points and just made personal sacrifices to make it work. And also in the book, if you could just talk about this quickly, I love this idea of visualization that you had. You said that you would see yourself on a team plane in the coach's seat, and you thought about the team meetings and how you would improve the process or keep it the same when you eventually became a coach. And I think that's such an awesome mentality and perspective to have. No one was requiring you to do that, yet you went out of your way to, take notes on what you would do and build up a playbook, so to speak. So when you became a coach, you could become the best coach that you could be. Can you maybe talk about that a little more? Why you thought it was so important to have the visualization aspect of it?
Yeah. So I think that, I think it's tough because sometimes, in one breath, I'm saying be all in and kind of embrace the grunt role. And then I'm going to also say, take some time to sort of peer out from the rubbish and imagine yourself in the leadership positions that you want to be in. So, for example, I would see the head coach deal with cutting a player or deciding which players would be up for a game. So you can have 46 players go into a game with a jersey. So you're having to basically tell 7 guys each week, hey, you're not going to travel. And so just hearing his thought process and hearing what he thought were the important aspects in making that decision, I would then take that and then just say, hey, what do I think about this? Do we need an extra offensive lineman, or maybe is an extra defensive lineman more important based on who we're playing? And I would just walk through those scenarios. And I thought it was a good mental exercise for me because it, one, helped me to kind of remember those decisions more. And two, it just also gave me a little hope that I can envision myself at some point, making decisions at that level.
Mm-hmm. And when you're doing this, are you going all into your imagination, like kind of imagining what you'd wear or what the room would be like? Are you going like that detailed into it?
Oh yeah, Adam, in my mind, I had my office completely decorated in my mind. I knew what kind of furniture I wanted. I knew, so a big part of the football environment is sort of what's the collateral up on the wall. So the quotes and the pictures and I knew exactly what I would want up on the walls and what slogans. And so everything, the dress, what I would wear, what I want my other coaches to wear. They seem like, really minute things, but really as a head coach, you are in charge of all of that. And so, I thought it was a good exercise for me to just kind of put myself in that position. One, because I kind of gained an appreciation for sort of the difficulty of the job. And then two, it just helped me to sort of frame my own leadership style for the game of football.
So with those concluding thoughts from Daron, we are now at the end of the mindset section. We're now moving on to the skill set. Yes, mindset is extremely important in whatever you want to do. You may have the most positive, optimistic outlook on your goals, but without the skills, you aren't going to get that far. In the past year, I've spoken with some experts on certain skills that we must work on, regardless of our careers. As with the mindset guests, I would recommend that you scan through our episode list and download any episodes that discuss skills you want to improve. That said, I'm going to single out 4 distinct skills here and have my guests share some insights on them. They are decision-making, negotiation, connecting with others, and time management. So let's start with decision-making. This is such an important skill in each of our lives, so I wanted to interview someone who has thought about this skill and has had a lot of experience making decisions, preferably under pressure. So I was extremely pleased to speak with Annie Duke, one of the most legendary poker players in history. Annie is retired from poker now and wrote a book on decision-making called Thinking in Bets. In this excerpt of our conversation, Annie starts by speaking about that eternal debate of luck versus skill. And yeah, it's interesting. I follow David Einhorn, the investor. He's actually a poker player too, and he says that investing in poker is pretty similar, except for poker, you receive the outcome right away, where investing, you have to wait potentially years to see if you're right or not. But even receiving that outcome right away isn't the whole picture as you describe in your book, because you could have won because of luck. You don't exactly know what happened except the outcome. So like, you've lived in both worlds with, the poker world and outside the poker world. Getting that feedback, how do you deal with deciding whether some event is luck or whether it's skill? Like how do you get into that?
So now you've gotten down into the core of the problem. So so here's really the issue that is really so revealed in poker. That's the issue that we have in any area of life. Investing, business decisions, any kind of life decisions, choosing a partner, even what happens when you follow or don't follow the rules of the road. I mean, you can get down into really most life decisions fall into this category, which is that there's lots and lots of uncertainty. And the uncertainty comes from two places. The first place is that there's hidden information. So the cards are face down. So you're making these decisions without knowing what your opponent's actual cards are, which makes it very hard for you to calculate out what the best choice is or even what the worst choice is, because I can't see what you have. And to make that problem even worse, and this is where I think that it's sort of an illusion that there's a big difference between poker because it takes a while to get the outcome versus investing because it takes a long time, is that most hands of poker end up with the cards never being revealed. Mm-hmm. And without the cards ever being revealed, it's very unclear what the worst or best choice might have been. Sort of all you know is you won or lost the hand. And so that's not that different between you make some sort of investment, say in a stock, and the stock is sort of ticking up and down, minute by minute. Mm-hmm. But, so that is sort of similar to an outcome that you might be getting in poker, is that you do have these fluctuations that are happening, which is really what those chip exchanges are. But you're not getting a fully formed outcome in the sense that I mostly don't get to see your cards to know, did I have the best hand? Did I have the worst hand? What might have been the best choices, in the sense that you might have that information, for example, in every game of chess that you play. Because right. I can see your pieces and I can see where you moved them and what all the possible moves were. So that's the first source of uncertainty that's really difficult to deal with, is this hidden information problem. And then the second source of uncertainty, which really mucks things up, is this luck issue. So, the problem is that even if you took away all of the hidden information, you can still win with the worst hand and lose with the best hand. You can think about a game like backgammon as being, it's like poker without the hidden information, right? I can see where all of your checkers are in backgammon. But so I can sort of calculate out if I have a superior position to you at any given time, but you have to roll the dice. So even if I have a superior position to you right now, and even if I play my position perfectly, I can still lose to you because the dice don't go my way. Mm-hmm. So where this causes a problem is that all we have to see is the outcome. I won or lost the hand. And how do we derive then, if we know that luck could be the main force? It could be the main force, whether that outcome was due to luck or skill. Did I play right and I just got unlucky, or did I play poorly and I sort of got what I deserved? So, it feels a little amorphous when we talk about poker, but I think where we can see this really clearly is if we think about something super simple, like going through a traffic light. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I don't know about you, so I'll just add, have you ever run a red light in your life?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right. I bet, actually, because I've done this, I bet that there have been times when you might have done it on purpose, like it's 2 a.m. and there's literally no one around and it's taking forever for the light to change. And there's no traffic. So maybe you've done that on purpose. I did that. Like, I don't do that anymore, but when I was younger, maybe I did that.
Mm-hmm.
So you've run red lights. Have you ever like gotten in an accident because of it?
Not yet. Knock on wood.
Not yet. Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's a good outcome. But can we agree that it's not a good decision to run a red light?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, and I personally, I don't know about you, but I've actually run a red light and got a green light rather. I've been following the rules of the road and I've run a green light and gotten into an accident before. Mm-hmm. So, and yet I don't go back and say, oh, going through green lights, that's such a terrible idea. So this is where we can see, like in this very simple example, which is very, very skill driven, what the influence of luck is. And so if all that I tell you, if you don't have access to whether the light was green or red, right, that sort of would be the hidden information piece. Mm-hmm. If all I tell you is I got through the traffic light safely, how do you know whether I made a good decision or not going through the intersection?
Right.
If all I tell you is I got in an accident, how do you know when you can't see the light and you can't see whether I was following the rules of the road? And that's kind of the problem of most of the decisions that we're making in our lives.
Exactly. And I guess just going beyond sports, in our day-to-day lives, I mean, we all deal with this phenomenon to one extent or the other. But do you see resulting being more prevalent in certain situations, maybe higher stakes situations, compared to day-to-day situations we see in our lives?
You know what? I think that it happens in just even the smallest of situations. You're looking at the menu and you're trying to decide what to order. And I mean, this is a very small stakes situation, right?
Yeah.
And you decide on an order, you get your food, it's terrible. And what do you think immediately? I should have ordered the other thing.
Exactly.
Right? Oh, that was such a bad decision to order this. Well, how could it be a bad decision? You didn't know it was going to come out poorly. And you'll do this even in situations where you have experience at the restaurant and the food has actually been good in the past. And you order it and you're still like, oh, what a bad decision. Why did I order this? That's as low stakes as it can get. It's just your lunch.
Right.
Right. So, I think that this happens all the time. It happens certainly in HR decisions, right? When we hire someone and they turn out to maybe not work out or they quit after 6 months or whatever. What a terrible decision to hire that person. Well, maybe not. Maybe you had available candidates, and of the available candidates, that person had the highest likelihood of being a good hire. But the fact is that, of course, there's uncertainty, and of course, there's hidden information there. You're looking at the person's CV. You're trying to do the best that you can with the interview process, but you don't get to have them come work in your office for 6 months before you decide to hire them on, unless you happen to be hiring on an intern. Mm-hmm. And even then, you only have you just have more information in terms of predicting how they'll turn out as a hire in the future. It's still not definite; it gets closer. But when you've got 4 candidates coming in, and you're looking at their CVs and you're checking their references and you're doing the interview, it's probabilistic how it's going to turn out. It's certainly not certain. And maybe you're choosing the person who has the highest probability of working out among all of the people that you have to choose from. But maybe the highest probability is, I think it's 60%. Well, that means that 40% of the time, maybe that hire isn't going to work out. That doesn't mean you made a bad decision.
Yeah.
It means that you chose the highest probability to work out. I think that I think a really good example of this problem actually comes from the 2016 presidential election. Mm-hmm. When you looked at Nate Silver, sort of where Nate Silver kind of landed, in the last week leading up to the election, he had, Clinton about 65% to win and Trump about 35% to win. So when Trump won, what did people say? Well, Nate Silver was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Now the pollsters got it wrong. Yeah.
Right. But no, Nate Silver said it was 35%.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that he was wrong. It means that he was assigning probabilities to a single election, and that we can't really say a lot about whether his algorithm is wrong unless we look across all of the elections that he's predicted. We just don't have enough data based on one time. When 30%, 35% happens a lot. I mean, to give you an idea of how much 35% happens, it's about Monday, Tuesday, and half of Wednesday during a week. So unless you're like incredibly surprised that Monday and Tuesday sort of roll around every week, you probably shouldn't have been that surprised that, Trump won. It would be like, it's Monday, it's Monday. I'm wrong. It like literally doesn't make sense off the one time. And I think that that's what resulting causes us to do, is to think that the one time matters so much for determining decision quality. And it really doesn't say very much about it when these things are so loosely linked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like people, if you give odds of 60, 40, 70, 30, they think the 40 or 30 is zero.
Yep.
And they're shocked when the 30% actually happens, even though it's 30% 3 times out of 10.
Right. So I guess one of the more brutal ways that I put it to people is, you think 30% is zero? Okay, I have a gun with 10 chambers in it, and I'm going to fill 3 of them with bullets.
Yeah, right. Right.
Do you want to play?
Yeah.
And of course people are like, what? No.
Yeah, exactly.
No way. And it's like, well, okay, but you have to understand, like, that's 30%. So, Pete Carroll, this is the Pete Carroll problem, right? Like, Pete Carroll had a gun with 100 chambers, and like 2 of them were filled.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it, and he spun the chambers, and, the bullet came out of the gun. I mean, that's what we need to remember. Is there, and this is the big problem, is that, I think that we talk about being results oriented as kind of a good thing in life. And in fact, it's kind of a bad thing to be results oriented, because what it does is it means that you're looking at the quality of the outcome. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, this is what tells me whether decisions were good. And the fact is that for most of the decisions you make in life, it doesn't tell you very much, because you can't collect enough data to say one way or the other. It's like, you don't have 10,000 coin flips at most things. You have a couple. Yeah. And if I flip a coin twice, it doesn't tell me very much about the coin.
Next up is a discussion of negotiation skills. Like Annie Duke, I wanted to find someone who had extensive life experience with the skill, preferably someone negotiating some of the most difficult situations that we could imagine. This led me to Chris Voss, the former lead international kidnapping negotiator at the FBI. Chris also wrote the popular negotiation book titled Never Split the Difference. Chris has so many good pointers in his book, and we only scrape the surface in this excerpt here. If you're interested in learning how to become a better negotiator, I highly recommend listening to the whole episode. So, back to capitalizing on loss. Like, say one of our listeners is in their job, they're trying to get a higher salary with their boss or something like that. They're in a traditional salary negotiation. Maybe it's their performance review or something. So, like, how do you even start doing that? How do you start thinking about leveraging that idea of loss to kind of get a higher salary?
Well, first of all, what's the boss's point of view when you're asking for more money?
Sure, the boss's point of view is we need to not necessarily cut costs, but we're watching our spending. So I guess they're coming into it with the idea that they don't want to give a raise.
Right. All right. So, and that's the more neutral point of view. And I needed somebody to point this out to me before I realized it was utterly true. But when we come in and ask for the boss for more money, the boss's reaction is that we're selfish. Mm-hmm. Most bosses view employees as selfish people because the only time they walk into the boss's office is when they want something for themselves.
Right. Right.
Nobody ever walks into the boss's office and says, "Boss, how can I make your day better today?"
Exactly.
How can I lift burdens off you? When people walk in, I want. And you might say to yourself, well, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. It doesn't matter that that's not the boss's reaction. The boss is a human being too. So you start out by saying, like, look, you're not going to like what I have to say. I mean, I got bad news. I'm going to seem selfish. I'm going to seem ungrateful. You got to set this up because you're going to ask for more money. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to ask it directly. Like, how can I be more valuable? How can I earn that raise? How can I earn that promotion? How can I be so valuable to you that you can't help but give me more money? Because if you don't, you're scared I'm going to lose you. I mean, again, it's context. You're setting the stage to make it palatable. In every single negotiation, the other side says to themselves, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
Why should I do this for you? even when it's a friend. That's what negotiation's about. People coming together saying, here, what's in it for me? So think it through for this. What's in it for you with the boss? Boss wants to pay you more if you're going to give him more. Mm-hmm. If you're going to get the boss promoted, the boss wants you around. If you're going to back the boss up, the boss wants you around. So as you begin to set the stage for that by positioning yourself as a team player who will be on the boss's team. Now the boss is more inclined to want to give you more money because you're more valuable to him, and he sees himself as an asset to the company. So by implication, you're more valuable to the company.
Seems like it's capitalizing on this idea of reciprocity, right? If you read Cialdini's Influence, you give something, it's like a tit for tat sort of negotiation. You give something, they feel more obliged to give it back to you. Reciprocity
is a huge impact on everyone on the planet, which is why Dr. Cialdini wrote that phenomenal book, and he said it applies to human beings. So it transcends culture, just like that emotional intelligence transcends culture. Yeah. And then if I could also discuss with you too, you have some, I guess, quote unquote unconventional advice compared to other traditional negotiators. And first you talk about the power of no. You say most negotiators are looking for yes, trying to get a couple yeses in a row because the counterpart theoretically will be more inclined to say yes for your ultimate ask, right? But you say that a lot of yeses are kind of BS to some extent and that you're looking for no's. Right. So can you explain that a little further? Yeah, well, yes is one of the most useless words on the planet, yet it's one of it lures us more than anything else. Like we have a lust for yes. I mean, it's beyond love. It's an addiction. And first of all, the problem with yes is nothing without how anyway. Yeah. And so that renders it relatively useless because, it's nothing without how. The other part is, since so many people love it, so many lust for it. I mean, it's been described as the most beautiful word in any language, Then it's such an enticement that people can give us the false yes and just walk us down a path by saying yes to us and then change their mind. I mean, every business person has been lured into yes only to find out later that it's a no. And it happens over and over and over again because we lust for yes so much. Now, the flip side of yes is, while we lust for it, we hate saying it. What do we let ourselves in for? What's the catch? What's the hidden hook? Where are they leading us by trying to get us to say yes? So we get our guard up and we become very, very nervous and anxious when we say yes. And if you're nervous and your guard is up, then by definition, you're not paying attention. You're not focused. You're going to miss what the other side's saying. So that's why we don't even bother with it. So what do? The flip side is people feel comfortable when they say no. They feel safe. They feel protected. And we've coached clients where the client has said, look, the other side's in no mode. And that's all they say is no. Every single answer is no. So we're like, perfect. Just change your questions.
Yeah, right.
And they're like, no, that's stupid. That won't work. But it works every time. And we flip from do you agree to do you disagree? Okay. We flip from would you like to do this to are you against this? Is this a bad idea? Do you oppose this? And we call these calibrated no's. And we've come to find on a regular basis that a calibrated no is worth 5 yeses. Like when you say to someone, do you disagree instead of do you agree? They'll say, no, I don't agree. And as a matter of fact, if we're going to do this, we got to do this, 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 and this. Well, that was 4 more yeses to other conversations that were instantaneous because they think things through. So calibrated no is worth 5 yeses easily each and every time out.
And if I can also ask too, just going back into some of the elements of your book, there are 2 phrases that I really enjoyed your discussion of. You say that's right is the 2 sweetest words in negotiation. And then in response to other people, you ask, how do you want me to do this? Or something to that extent.
Yeah.
Can you speak about just the importance of those and why they're so powerful in a negotiation?
Yeah, well, how am I supposed to do that is a great how question. It's deferential, and we like things that do things simultaneously. And what that does is, one of the effects is forced empathy. When you say to the other side, how am I supposed to do that? You force them to take a look at your position, whether they want to or not. You trigger what Daniel Kahneman refers to as slow, deep thinking. You make them stop and think and look hard at you. It's impossible not to. So you're triggering empathy in reverse. You're forcing them to have empathy towards your position. It's deferential, so they don't feel threatened by it. You say it in a very deferential tone of voice. That's one of the important aspects to it. It buys you time, gives you the opportunity to think. It keeps the conversation going. It works so effectively on so many levels. And typically it extracts concessions from the other side. Like 85 to 95% of the time, you'll start getting concessions immediately. Those are high percentages that make you very wealthy working with percentages like that.
Exactly.
So the percentages of that are very high, and it never backfires. Mm-hmm. The worst that ever happens is the other side says, because if you want the deal, you'll do it because you have to, or some version of that.
So how do you respond in that situation if they're just totally stonewalling you?
Well, it's not, that may not be stonewalling. That may be a legitimate answer that, you pushed your limit on this aspect of the negotiation, which is actually your job, is to push your limits and not let things blow up. When someone says, because if you want the deal, you'll have to, they haven't stormed out of the room. They haven't broken off negotiations. You've just found out you pushed them to their limit and you're still negotiating instead of having them threaten to launch missiles on you or whatever. Someone might threaten to do. Threaten to send in the SWAT team, whatever they're going to do. Threaten to walk out. You're still in the conversation. So if you're really not going to do it, in a rare instance where you're not going to do it, your next response is another version of saying no. We've got 4 of them. And you say, look, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for me. I'm sorry, I don't do that. Because that's another emotionally intelligent way to say no. It's not calling the other person a name. It's leading with an I message, I'm sorry, which is a great way to let somebody know bad news is on the way. So I'm sorry, I can't do that. I don't do that anymore. It doesn't work for me. That's a great way to say no. And, if somebody walks away, they can walk away then. Or they could say, well, what can you do? Or let's talk about other things. I mean, if you're going to trigger a good answer from the other side, you've got to prompt them into it spontaneously so it then becomes their idea.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's, we've got fallback positions for how am I supposed to do that, but you don't go there unless you have to.
Right. And it seems like that's the holy grail, right? You have this idea of what you want them to agree with, but implanting that idea in their mind so they think that it's their original idea. Is that kind of the objective? I mean, it's not necessarily to manipulate people.
No, 1,000%, because when we say, you and I said before earlier, yes is nothing without how. Mm-hmm. This not only gets you into the how, but then they own the how.
Yeah.
And when they own the how, then they will kill themselves to make it happen. Like if it's your how, they'll be like, it was your idea anyway. I don't care if it fails.
Right.
But if it's their how and it fails, then their ego goes with it, and people will fight to the death to protect their ego.
Exactly. From negotiation skills, we're now talking about connecting with others. I used that term instead of networking, but it's essentially the idea of building genuine relationships with new acquaintances. I have some strong feelings about networking, and you can listen to some earlier episodes to hear them. That said, in this excerpt, you'll hear my discussion with Ryan Paugh, co-founder of the Community Company and author of Superconnector. We speak about some of the ways that all of us can build our own strong communities in our lives. Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Everyone today is all about getting as many likes or followers as possible, and it's really more important to emphasize quality over quantity. I totally agree on that front. And you were saying earlier that, and in the book you say that you're more introverted, you're more type B. So is it true that anyone can become a superconnector? Like for some people that may think, oh, I'm on the quieter side, I'm not the life of the party. Anyone can do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, like we said earlier, I think that in some respects, the introvert types out there have a leg up in becoming a superconnector, because instead of being the person who always feels like they have to lead the conversation and be sort of like the center of like any conference or any big crowded event, they actually sort of shut up and listen and really diagnose what other people are talking about, learn about their challenges, learn about what's exciting to them. And if you are a strong connector, you're really just taking in all that data and creating like, a finished puzzle in your brain. You're figuring out how to connect the dots and figure out how you can support them, or how someone else in your network or a resource you have access to could support them. You're less talking and more listening and getting a lot more insights in the process that allow you to be a really strong connector to begin with. I think actually a lot of extroverts who are connectors struggle with that, actually taking the back seat and listening. So in that regard, introverts, you guys have like some superpowers too. And I feel like at the end of the day, we have to embrace and understand that is a strength and not a weakness.
No, that's awesome to hear. And if I can go back to what you were saying earlier, just about this whole idea of patience and just not looking for instant gratification when you're meeting people. Now, as I said earlier, I live in New York City, and every single night there's a meetup or some event that you can go to. Yep. And at these meetups or networking events, people are just handing out business cards, and they're looking for some quick, instant gratification. And I think what you say in the book is great. Obviously, I mean, you have to be patient. You have to let these connections bloom, but people still want that instant gratification. So how can people change their mindset to overcome that?
Yeah. I think, again, it's all about quality over quantity. And I think in a lot of situations, right, we let FOMO take over, fear of missing out. And that sort of forces us to go down these similar paths, to be at every single networking event that's happening in the city and be a part of every single circle. And we just end up exhausting ourselves and spend a lot of time talking to people where there's no mutual value that's ever going to come of that, and taking part in these transactional types of meetups that really, again, like just provide nothing else other than like a buzz and a bunch of crumpled up pieces of paper that you're going to throw away. How to get over that specific challenge is really just, again, to be true to yourself and to understand that, your time is your most valuable asset. And at the end of the day, if you take a step back and think about the value of that event, and maybe just throwing a dart at a dartboard and hitting a bullseye, which has such a small chance of probability of happening, is that worth your time? Or is perhaps spending time, at home by yourself, blogging, sharing your ideas, building some sort of medium to show the world who you are, connecting with a few people intimately online who you think you could build a relationship with? Is that more worth your time? And then being able to maybe take some of these relationships a step deeper and schedule time for yourselves on a weekday, instead of going to this big event and having dinner with this human, or having coffee, or maybe connecting a group, maybe a half a dozen to a dozen or so people with a common vision, and doing a dinner in your apartment with these people to help bring that circle together. So you can not only build relationships with them, but you can also be sort of that community building leader that's also connecting them with one another. Thinking outside of the box is probably the best advice I can give, to just recognize that, we don't have to follow the status quo. We can make connections, and arguably more meaningful ones, by taking a different approach. One of my favorite people in the book, John Levy, he does these dinners maybe once a month, where he brings together really cool leaders and entrepreneurs from various different sectors to his home to cook dinner and have conversations with one another. And those meetups are so much more valuable than any conference or event they would actually attend at any point throughout the year. Some of the relationships they build there are so true and so real that, it's just amazing what can happen when we get back to the basics of connecting with each other in a more human way, not in this big crowded conference with all the buzz and all the noise. That's what I suggest. Just don't listen to the status quo. Think outside the box. There's some great showcases and great people that you can get inspiration from in the book. But also, if you do read the book, realize that it's not gospel. Realize that you shouldn't follow everything that we say to a T, because you will fail. At the end of the day, this is a book that's meant to inspire you. Steal the things that work for you and apply them to your own life. But also, think about things that you can come up with on your own that are even more applicable to your own life. Yeah. Not everything in the book is going to be applicable to you. And again, it goes back to having that strong sense of self-awareness that is going to guide you on what the right path is for you to take in terms of how you build relationships in your life.
Yeah, that's all great advice. And speaking of John Levy, I was going to ask you about him because I heard about him in the past. There was a New York Times article on his dinners, and people like Bill Nye, the science guy, showed up. He had some really interesting people. And it sounds like, he has a huge loft apartment to hold these dinners, which is a major advantage. And so for people that want to do something like that may not have the resources, or say, for instance, that they just moved to a new city, they graduated from college and want to meet people and build out their network, so to speak. How can they get started doing that today?
There's just dozens of great communities in every city across the country for, this type of meetup. And they're not all meeting in crowded bars like we talked about before. Many of them are creating more experiential events that you can be a part of. If you don't have that loft, there are plenty of people that are already, with those resources doing these types of things. But if you want to lead on your own and create your own community and become a community builder yourself in your own city, not having that loft apartment shouldn't stop you. Yeah. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of ways you can do that. There's great companies out there that are filling up spaces and venues all around your city that aren't filled, and you could probably get that at a discounted rate and group pay for a very intimate dinner in the back of a really swanky, awesome new restaurant in any city that you're a part of. You guys could meet literally in the middle of Central Park if you're in New York City. Right. And do a picnic, and it will probably cost you nothing. Just thinking outside the box a little bit here, there's a million different things you can do, and it's not all about, having a ritzy, New York City apartment. It's about who you bring together. That curated group matters that much, much more than the venue that you're going to. Making sure that it's a high quality group, not too big. Could have that meetup anywhere in a Starbucks, and I'm sure that there would be some value. I don't recommend doing it in Starbucks, right. But I'm just saying some value would come out of that, even if you were to do it in that simplistic of a way.
And if I can ask you too, we just have a couple more minutes here. If just about the art of following up. So say that you meet someone for the first time or even the second time, and you feel like you've built a solid, starting relationship with them. But you want to pursue it further. How do you go about pinging that person? Do you wait until they ping you? What's your general sense on that?
Yeah, it's like dating, right? Yeah. How long do you wait to text? Who texts who first? It's funny. There is a strategy to that. There's not a right or wrong strategy, but I think it's important at the end of the day to always be thoughtful. When you follow up with people, I think it's important to make sure that you recall something or put a little personal spin on it to remind them of something you talked about at the event. Show that you were really listening and showing that you were thoughtful enough to follow up with more than just, hey, great to meet you. Let's set up time to talk. Maybe there are synergies, which is one of the most annoying things that I get in emails sometimes from people who want to connect. What is really important, again, beyond that personal touch, I think that's a strong and powerful weapon, is to be very thoughtful about why you want to follow up with them, why you may want to reconnect after an event. Explain what the value is. Don't write a diatribe. We're not talking about 10 paragraphs worth of why, this person should work with your company or want to hire you or whatever the goal is. Quick, simple, concise understanding of what the value of reconnecting with them would be. Most people again stick to the very common, I think there's synergies. And if I took every synergy type of meeting that came into my inbox, I would be taking meetings day in, day out, 7 days a week with no time for anything else in my business. You got to be respectful of people's time and understand that time spent is time that they now can't spend building their company or doing something else that's important to them. So it's important to make sure that the value is there that you see. So people have an opportunity to opt in that there is mutual value, or to opt out and explain why. And I think that's really important to do, and it will actually open a lot more doors than, again, if you just put out some templated email that you could have sent to anyone under the sun that you met at any event.
Lastly, I wanted to discuss time management skills. This is something that, admittedly, I could improve, and I'm sure that I'm not alone with that. To provide some helpful tips, I spoke with Laura Vanderkam, a time management guru and author of Off the Clock, a popular book on time management. In this excerpt, Laura speaks about our obsession with busyness and finding the time to work on our passion projects. Cool. So I'd just like to spend a few minutes just talking about some of the pressing problems of time management. And I feel like, at least for Americans, there's this tension. We all want more time to do the things we truly want to do, to have sort of that liberating off the clock feeling you mentioned in your book, which is the title of your book. But on the other hand, Americans really take pride in being busy. And I suppose the argument goes that busyness shows we're important, that we're needed, that we have many responsibilities. And at least in a commercial law firm where I worked, your identity was almost baked into it. You were directly compensated based on the number of hours you billed. So what do you think about that tension, kind of the push and pull between wanting more free time, yet kind of appreciating those feelings of importance that are attached with busyness?
Yeah, well, that's probably why a lot of lawyers wind up quitting, right?
Yeah, right.
Becoming more efficient does not in and of itself help you. I mean, it does over time if you can bill a higher percentage of your hours, but, and you don't have to seek out work, it's coming to you. Those are all things that allow you to bill more time. But, it is still that you are rewarded more for working 50 hours than working 40, even if you are very effective in the 40. Right. So I think that you hit the nail on the head with your discussion that, saying we're busy makes us feel important. Because if you think about it, the whole idea of busyness is like, I have a great deal to do, which means that the demand for my time is high. And the reason that demand for my time is high is because I am important. And we wouldn't walk around saying like, I am important. Like, I want you to know just how important I am. So instead it's like, oh, I'm so busy, right? Because that's a nice way to say that everyone wants a piece of you, at work and at home. So there's a certain aspect of that people like to talk about, just how busy they are. I mean, the problem, of course, is that we start to believe it. And we start to believe that we don't have time for the things that are important to us. And so, I challenge people, a couple of things. One thing is just stop using the word busy. It's a simple enough change. But like whenever somebody asks you, how's life? How was your weekend? Like, don't answer busy. That's a pretty boring answer if you think about it. Just answer something else. Say, oh, it was great. We went out to dinner at this wonderful restaurant. Have you been there? That's a much better conversation, right? Or, I volunteered at this place. Have you ever heard of this group? Those are discussions that actually go somewhere, as opposed to like, I'm busy. So change your conversations. The tracking time can help you get a sense that maybe there is more time there than you have thought. And hopefully people will find that liberating as opposed to disappointing. Some people find it disappointing. Like, oh, I thought I worked 65 hours and I only worked 45. Well, let me tell myself that this was an atypical week. Let me go find another week to track. So, or you could just celebrate. Like, look how much I'm getting done in 45 hours a week. I'm awesome.
Exactly.
That would be a better way to approach it.
Well, to avoid that chopping up the time, pattern for someone that's really busy, I guess for their job, maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but maybe their job is demanding in that they have to be quick with email or they have to constantly be connected. Do you have any tips for people in order to kind of ease the burdens of time feeling like it's slipping when they're connected like that? Or how would you recommend people deal with that situation?
I mean, if you do have to be on email constantly for your job, you are still better off checking, say, once an hour consciously for 15 to 20 minutes and then being off for 40 to 45 minutes. All right. You can do a lot in 45 minutes. And most urgent things could at least wait 45 minutes, right? If you're checking 15 minutes on the hour, the longest somebody would have to wait is about an hour. And there's many reasons that could happen. You could be driving somewhere. I mean, you could be in a meeting. You could be whatever. Like, there's reasons people might have to wait an hour to hear from you. There's also, you can push back on it a little bit. I know a lot of people who are in client services but work in teams might assign a person for each sort of like after hours time to be the one dealing with client emails on the team. So, this person is on Monday night, kind of like a physician being on call. So you push the client to email everybody, right? Like email the whole team. And then the person who's on call Monday night will respond to it on Monday night. The person who's on call Tuesday night will respond on Tuesday night, and so on. And so everyone's on, 1 to 2 nights a week, but then they're off the other ones. So that's kind of nice. And just like put the phone in airplane mode for a while. Like, you can go a bit of time on nights and weekends and see what happens. I mean, maybe Earth will crash into the sun, but I'm guessing it won't. Like, we're not that important. Like, none of us are as important as we think we are.
Exactly.
And so, the Earth will keep spinning regardless of what you do. So if you want to be offline for a little bit, you probably can. You can also address expectations with the people who work for you. And because of the work I do, I've done a lot of like corporate workshops, speeches, and, people ask me questions. I remember one workshop, a woman was talking about like, she had to have her phone with her at night because her boss was sending emails at 9:00 at night. And she wanted to make sure she was on top of it and getting her what she wanted in their 24/7 company. And her boss is there. And her boss is like, I send emails at 9:00 because I'm with my kids from 6 to 8. They go to bed, and then I send emails afterwards because that's the time that works for me. It's not that I needed a response at 9 p.m. When she's just thinking about it, she assumes that the other person is also just on email at 9:00 because it works for her. But if it doesn't work for her, like, they need to have this conversation. And so once they did, it's great. It's like, oh, well, I'm glad we got that out in the open, right? Have these conversations and make sure that you do know what the expectations are before you jump to any conclusions.
Exactly. Yeah. Just constant communication, expectation setting, those sort of things. And so I guess from there, we know that there's this problem of time management, and you have a TED Talk from 2016. It's really good. I recommend people check it out, and I'll post a link in the show notes. But one of the things you say in there is that the most successful people don't build the lives they want by saving time, like shaving off 3 minutes here and 3 minutes there. It's kind of more involved than that. They build the lives they want, and then the time saves itself. So can you maybe further explain to listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of time management literature, if you read it, and I confess that I do all the time, hoping I'm going to find some like life-changing hack that will help me find hours in the day I didn't know existed. And, you read these articles and it's always tips like clean the shower while you're in it. Well, I don't know about you, but like, I'm not spending a lot of my life cleaning the shower anyway. So that's not going to save me hours in my day. And, that's the problem with these hacks. I mean, occasionally there's stuff that's like kind of cool or interesting. Like, there's no reason to spend more time on things that you don't like than you need to, but it's not going to be life-changing, right? Like, there's very few of these hacks that will truly change your life. I see stuff like people say, if you send a lot of emails where the answer is okay, type K instead of okay. Like, again, you're not changing your life by doing this. Like, you'll free up 2 seconds per email, even if you send 300 per day, that's 600 seconds. That's, 10 minutes. Awesome. Like, what did you do with that 10 minutes? I don't know. Probably not anything, again, life-changing. You're better off thinking about what you want to do more of with your life. Like, what do you want to fill your time with? What things would be meaningful and enjoyable for you and the people you care about? And the thing is, when you consciously fill your time with those things, put those things in first, give them priority space in your schedule, everything else naturally takes less time. I mean, I mentioned I was, deeply absorbed with editing this manuscript on Thursday. I wasn't on email all that much. I was caring because also was more about doing. Whereas if I hadn't had this big project I was into, I probably would have been on email all the time. And same thing in personal lives too. Like if you're doing something really cool with your friends, like you're all going to go volunteer at a soup kitchen together on Saturday. Well, you'll spend less time puttering around the house doing pointless housework. You'll do what absolutely has to still get done, but because you got this other thing that's filling your time, like you'll naturally spend less time on the things that were less important. So make sure you put the good stuff in first, and then everything else will kind of be more efficient just by the nature of how we spend time.
Exactly. And in the book, you have this idea. It's also an investing idea or personal finance idea of paying yourself first, right? Kind of prioritizing. You take the creative angle. If you have a creative project you want to work on, like a screenplay or art, you prioritize that in your schedule to make sure it gets done. And I think you had one client that was an artist, or she was a would-be artist, one of those, and she was struggling with this. And you told her to work on her art on Monday morning, which maybe would seem counterintuitive to some people. So can you maybe explain why a Monday morning for your creative or passionate projects is the way to go?
Yeah, this is a writer who wanted to write a book.
Okay.
And she had been working on it, telling herself she wanted to write a book for years. You know how this goes, these conversations. Like, yeah, I want to write a book someday. I was like, how do you make someday become reality? And she had been just, putting the time she had allocated for it was Friday afternoon. She said, okay, like Friday late afternoon, that's when I'm done with all my client demands, all this other stuff. I will work on my project then. That's when I'm going to work on writing. Well, you can imagine how this goes, because Friday afternoon, like anything that didn't get done during the week is, she's trying to get it done before she goes out the door for the weekend, or else she's finally got it done, but then it's like 5 o'clock. You're not starting anything new on 5 o'clock.
Right.
Like this is setting yourself up to fail. So, we talked about it, like moving that speculative work to first thing Monday morning. That she was going to work on this project from 8 to 10 a.m. on Monday morning. Now, it feels difficult to do that because, you could be using that time for your clients. There's things they want, but she was going to pay herself first. And by doing this one simple change, she was actually able to write the article that became a book proposal that actually became a book that came out this spring. And she's the same person. Like, she's just as good a writer, just as good a researcher, all this other stuff. The only difference is that she moved when she was devoting time to the speculative thing from Friday afternoon when it wasn't going to happen to Monday morning where she was paying herself first. Mm-hmm. And then it happened, and I think we all have things like that, it's the same thing as you said with personal finance. Like if you wait until the end of the month to save what's left over, well, guess what? Not going to be a whole lot left over.
Yeah.
If you save first, you'll probably get to the end of the month somehow, but you'll also have built wealth at the same time. So it's really about making sure that these things have the importance that they deserve within your life.
So again, those are some key insights that we shared together on the podcast last year. I've said this on the show before, but one of the best parts about putting in all of the work, scheduling interviews, producing, and marketing this podcast is the fact that I get to learn alongside all of you. Getting the opportunity to speak with world-class experts on virtually anything I want is something that I will never get sick of. As we grow and continue to get more listeners, my plan is to keep bringing on fascinating guests that can speak about some of the core tenets of this podcast, namely how to take intelligent risks in our lives, how to leave a job to pursue a new opportunity, and how to avoid inertia and live our lives in accordance with our expectations. I'm really pumped for this, so stay tuned for more. As I wrap up this episode, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to listen to this podcast. We're all busy and only have so many hours in the day, so it really means a lot to me that you've taken the time to listen to the show. We put a lot of love and effort into the show, from scheduling the guests to even releasing transcripts, so your support means so much. If you have any input on the show, whether that is a question about a particular episode, or even a suggestion for future guests or episode topics, feel free to get in touch with me. I read every email and would love to hear from you. You can email me at adam@thepowerofbold.com, or simply complete the contact form on our website, thepowerofbold.com. I'm super excited for next year, not only for the future of this podcast, but for my personal life. I'm getting married to my wonderful fiancée, Leah, and I couldn't be happier. It's going to be a great year. With all that said, thanks again for your support. I wish you the happiest holiday and the happiest new year. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Bold. For show notes and the transcript of this episode, visit thepowerofbold.com. Feel free to get in touch by visiting our Facebook and Twitter pages. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. We'll see you next time.